The iron wheels of the stagecoach groaned against the rutted trail as it lurched westward, each jolt sending a fresh wave of dust through the cracked leather curtains. Eloise Whitmore pressed her handkerchief to her nose, the delicate lace already brown with grime after 3 days of travel from the railhead at Cheyenne. Her trunk, secured atop the coach with rope and prayer, contained the remnants of a life she'd been forced to leave behind in Boston. Silk gowns now seemed as foreign to this landscape as she felt herself. "Mercy's Bend! Miss!" the driver hollered from his perch. "End of the line!" Through the dusty window, Eloise glimpsed a collection of weathered buildings huddled against the endless Wyoming sky. The town looked as if it had been dropped carelessly onto the prairie, left to bake under the merciless sun until the wood turned gray as old bones. She gathered her traveling dress, the navy wool now filmed with alkali dust, and prepared to face her exile. The scandal that had driven her here still burned fresh in her mind. Harold Pemberton, with his practiced charm and promises of marriage, had compromised her reputation thoroughly before abandoning her to face society's judgment alone. When the whispers became shouts, and the calling cards stopped arriving at the Whitmore mansion on Beacon Hill, her father had made the decision swiftly. She would go west to her uncle's ranch until the gossip died down, or perhaps forever. "A year or two in the territories will give Boston time to forget," he'd said, not meeting her eyes. What he meant was that he hoped she would disappear entirely, saving the family from further embarrassment. The stagecoach door swung open, and the driver, a leathery man with tobacco-stained whiskers, offered his hand. "Watch your step, ma'am. Ground's harder here than what you're used to." Indeed it was. Her kid leather boots, so fashionable in Boston's parlors, sank into the dusty main street of Mercy's Bend. The few townsfolk on the wooden sidewalk stopped their business to stare at her. Men in worn denim and leather, women in simple calico dresses that had seen too many washings. She might as well have been a peacock dropped among prairie chickens. Miss Whitmore. She turned to find a severe-looking man in his 50s, his face weathered to the color of saddle leather. Everything about him was sharp. The angle of his jaw, the cut of his pale eyes, the set of his shoulders under a black vest. "Uncle Josiah," she said, attempting a smile that felt brittle on her lips. "Just Josiah will do." He replied curtly, "We don't stand on ceremony out here." His gaze swept over her traveling ensemble with obvious disapproval. "That trunk your only baggage?" "Yes, Cole!" Josiah barked toward a group of men loading supplies onto a wagon. "Get the lady's trunk." A man separated from the group, moving with the easy, rolling gait of someone who'd spent half his life in the saddle. Eloise's breath caught involuntarily. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with shoulders that strained against his cotton shirt and skin bronzed by the sun. Dark hair curled from beneath his battered hat, and when he looked at her, his eyes were the color of coffee without cream. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat perfunctorily before moving past her to retrieve the trunk. She noticed the way his muscles bunched under his shirt as he hefted her trunk, containing her entire world, as if it weighed nothing. When he turned back, their eyes met for a moment, and she saw something flash across his face. Derision? Amusement? He looked at her silk-covered boots, now dusty and impractical, and his mouth quirked in what might have been a smirk. "Careful with that," she said sharply, her Boston accent pronounced in her irritation. "It contains items of value." "I'm sure it does," Cole replied, his voice low and roughened by cigarette smoke or trail dust. "Lots of use for silk and perfume out here on the range." Heat flooded her cheeks. "I'll have you know—" "Cole works for me," Josiah interrupted. "He's my top hand at Red Mesa. You'll be seeing plenty of him, so mind your manners, both of you." The ride to Red Mesa Ranch took 2 hours through landscape unlike anything Eloise had ever seen. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by distant bluffs that shimmered in the heat like mirages. Sagebrush and sparse grass clung to the red earth, and the sky pressed down like a vast blue weight. She sat beside Josiah on the wagon seat while Cole rode alongside on a paint horse, his posture easy and natural as if he'd been born in the saddle. Your father wrote me about your situation, Josiah said after they'd traveled in silence for nearly an hour. I don't tolerate loose behavior on my ranch. I didn't, Eloise began hotly, then stopped. What was the point? Everyone had already decided her guilt. You'll work, Josiah continued as if she hadn't spoken. Everyone at Red Mesa earns their keep. You'll help Maria with the household duties, learn to tend the kitchen garden, perhaps help with the chickens. Good honest labor might remind you of proper values. From atop his horse, Cole snorted softly. Eloise shot him a venomous look, but he was gazing out at the horizon, his profile sharp against the sky. Red Mesa Ranch sprawled in a valley between two ridges, the main house built of logs and chinked with mud. It was a far cry from the Whitmore mansion with its marble stairs and crystal chandeliers. Several outbuildings dotted the property, a barn, a bunkhouse, various sheds, and corrals where horses milled in the late afternoon sun. Your room's upstairs, Josiah said as they pulled up to the house. Maria will show you. Supper's at 6 sharp. We rise at 5. 5 in the morning? Eloise couldn't hide her dismay. Cole swung down from his horse, moving to unload her trunk. Son don't wait for city folks, he said, not looking at her. Neither do cattle. That evening, Eloise sat at the rough pine table in the kitchen, feeling utterly out of place. Maria, a Mexican woman with kind eyes and work-worn hands, had served a simple meal of beef stew, cornbread, and bitter coffee. The ranch hands ate in the bunkhouse, but Josiah had insisted she take her meals with him to learn proper ranch ways. Tomorrow Maria will find you suitable clothing, Josiah said, eyeing her blue silk dinner dress with disapproval. Can't have you traipsing around in that finery. You'll help with breakfast at 4:30. 4:30? Her voice came out as a squeak. The men need to eat before they ride out. He pushed back from the table. Best get your rest. Dawn comes early in Wyoming. Alone in her small room under the eaves, Eloise sat on the narrow iron bed and finally allowed herself to cry. The tears came in great, gulping sobs that she muffled with her fist. Everything familiar was gone. The gas lamps of Boston, the rustle of taffeta at evening parties, the comfortable routine of her old life. Even her shame would have been bearable among familiar surroundings. Here, she was utterly alone, condemned to hard labor among people who looked at her as if she were some exotic creature to be tamed. Through her window, she could see the bunkhouse where warm light spilled from the windows and the sound of masculine laughter drifted on the evening air. She wondered if Cole was among them, probably regaling the others with stories of the useless city woman who worried about her trunk, as if summoned by her thoughts. She saw him emerge from the bunkhouse, a cigarette glowing between his lips. He stood in the yard, looking up at the vast canopy of stars that seemed close enough to touch. For a moment, his face was unguarded, almost peaceful, and she saw something in his expression that looked like loneliness, a feeling she recognized all too well. Then he glanced toward the house, and even from a distance, she could swear he looked directly at her window. She jerked back, heart pounding, and pressed herself against the wall. When she finally dared to peek out again, the yard was empty. That first week at Red Mesa nearly broke her. The work was harder than anything she'd ever experienced. Her soft hands blistered from carrying water and scrubbing laundry. Her back ached from bending over the washboard and kitchen garden. The simple calico dresses Maria had found for her chafed against skin accustomed to silk, but it was the isolation that cut deepest. The ranch hands avoided her, offering only the bare minimum of politeness. To them, she was that Eastern lady, or worse, Whitmore's niece who got herself in trouble back east. She caught their speculative glances, heard the conversations that died when she entered a room. Cole was the worst of all. He seemed to take perverse pleasure in witnessing her struggles. When she fumbled with the egg basket, sending precious eggs rolling across the dusty yard, he was there leaning against the corral fence, that insufferable half-smile playing at his lips. When she tried to hang laundry and the Wyoming wind tore the sheets from her hands, sending them sailing like white flags of surrender, he was watching from atop his horse, making no move to help. "Enjoying the show?" she snapped one morning after struggling for 10 minutes to prime the kitchen pump. He shifted his weight, considering her with those dark eyes. "Just wondering how long you'll last. I'm tougher than I look. That ain't saying much." He moved past her to the pump, worked the handle twice with easy strength, and water gushed forth. "It's all in the rhythm, but I guess they don't teach that in finishing school." She wanted to slap the smugness from his face. Instead, she lifted her chin with as much dignity as she could muster. "Perhaps you could show me the proper technique, since you seem so eager to watch me fail." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or respect. "Your uncle pays me to work cattle, not train city girls." He walked away, spurs jingling, leaving her standing at the pump with tears of frustration burning her eyes. But that afternoon, she found a pair of leather work gloves on the kitchen steps, too small for any of the ranch hands. She knew who had left them, though she couldn't fathom why. As the days stretched into weeks, Eloise began to understand the rhythm of ranch life. The land itself was a harsh teacher, demanding respect and offering no mercy to those who underestimated it. She learned to read the sky for signs of weather, to move quietly around the horses, to treasure water in a land where rain was as precious as gold. And always, she was aware of Cole Travers watching her with those unreadable eyes, judging her, dismissing her as a pampered Eastern lady who would eventually break under the weight of real work. She didn't know which was worse, the open disdain of the townspeople or his silent, persistent scrutiny. What none of them knew, what she could never tell them, was that she was already broken. Harold Pemberton had seen to that. The scandal was only the visible wound. The deeper damage lay in how thoroughly she'd believed his lies, how completely she'd given her trust only to have it shattered, here in this unforgiving land. She wasn't trying to find herself. She was trying to disappear, to work herself into exhaustion so she wouldn't have to think about what she'd lost and what she'd never had at all. The morning sun cast long shadows across the corral as Eloise approached the fence, her heart hammering against her ribs. 3 weeks at Red Mesa, and Josiah had finally declared it time for her to learn to ride. "Can't have a ranch woman who's afraid of horses," he'd said over breakfast, his tone suggesting this was yet another test she was expected to fail. The ranch hands had gathered along the fence like crows on a wire, their presence making her skin prickle with self-consciousness. She recognized most of them now. Tom Garrett with his perpetual squint, young Billy Hawkins who still blushed when she passed, and the Vasquez brothers who spoke little English but watched everything with knowing eyes. And there, leaning against the gate post with studied casualness, was Cole. "This here's Buttercup," said Sam, the elderly wrangler, leading out a mare that looked anything but gentle despite her name. "She's got spirit, but she's honest." Eloise stared at the horse, trying to hide her terror. In Boston, she'd ridden in Central Park, seated side saddle on placid mounts that followed well-worn paths. This creature, with its rolling eyes and restless hooves, belonged to a different world entirely. "Well," Cole's voice carried across the yard, "gonna admire her all day, or you planning to ride?" She shot him a glare that could have curdled milk. "I'm assessing the situation." "That's so." He pushed off from the fence, moving with that lazy grace that made everything look effortless. "Looks more like you're scared." "I'm not scared." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. "Prove it." The challenge hung in the air between them. She knew he was baiting her, knew she should ignore him, but her pride, that fatal Whitmore pride, wouldn't let her back down. She approached Buttercup, trying to remember what little she knew about horses. "Wrong side," Cole said when she moved to the horse's right. "Unless you're planning to ride backwards." Snickers rippled through the watching men. Heat flooded her cheeks as she circled to the left side, grateful for the divided skirt Maria had found for her, though it was still far more revealing than anything she'd worn in Boston. "Foot in the stirrup," Sam instructed kindly. "Grab the horn, and up you go." It took 3 humiliating attempts before she managed to haul herself into the saddle, her muscles already trembling with effort. Buttercup shifted beneath her, and she clutched the saddle horn with both hands. "Relax," Sam said. "Horse can feel you're nervous. Makes her nervous too." Easier said than done when she felt like she was perched atop a living earthquake. She tried to settle her weight, to find some balance, but every movement of the horse sent fresh panic through her. "Give her some rein," Cole called out. "She can't move with you choking up on her like that." She loosened her death grip slightly, and Buttercup immediately began to walk. The motion was alien, rolling and unpredictable, nothing like the smooth gaits of her park horses. She bounced in the saddle, teeth clacking together, completely out of rhythm with the animal beneath her. "Lord have mercy," someone muttered. "Looks like a sack of potatoes up there." "Move with her," Cole said. And suddenly he was beside the fence, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "Feel her rhythm. You're fighting her every step." "I'm trying," she gritted out. "No, you're thinking. Stop thinking. Just feel." For a moment, their eyes locked, and something shifted in his expression, the mockery fading into something almost like understanding. Then Buttercup decided she'd had enough of walking in circles and broke into a trot. The world exploded into chaos. Eloise bounced wildly, her feet slipping from the stirrups, hands scrambling for purchase. She heard shouts, saw the fence rushing toward her, and then she was airborne, landing in the dust with a bone-jarring thud that drove all breath from her lungs. She lay there, stunned, staring up at the merciless blue sky. Every part of her hurt, but worse than the physical pain was the sound of laughter from the watching men. Even Billy Hawkins was grinning behind his hand. A shadow fell across her face. Cole stood over her, extending one calloused hand. "You done, or you want another go?" She wanted to spit in his face. She wanted to cry. She wanted to run back to Boston and hide in her room forever. Instead, she grasped his hand and let him pull her to her feet, ignoring the way her palm tingled at the contact. "Again," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Something flickered across his features. Surprise, perhaps, or approval. "Sam, bring her back around." The second attempt was no better, nor the third. By the fourth, her dress was torn. Her hair had escaped its pins, and every inch of her body was either bruised or coated in dust. But she kept getting back on, driven by a stubbornness she didn't know she possessed. "That's enough for today." Josiah called from the porch where he'd been watching. "Girls got more grit than I expected." As the hands dispersed, returning to their duties, Eloise limped toward the water trough. She splashed her face, not caring that she was making a spectacle of herself, then slumped against the fence post. "Here." Cole appeared beside her, offering a dipper of fresh water. She took it wordlessly, too exhausted for pride. "You did all right." She nearly choked on the water. "I fell off 4 times. 5, he corrected. "But you got back on 6. That's what counts." "Why do you hate me?" The question escaped before she could stop it. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I don't hate you. I just know you're kind." "My kind?" "Rich, spoiled, playing at ranch life until you get bored or daddy calls you home." His jaw tightened. "Seen it before. Eastern folks come out here thinking it's some grand adventure, then leave when it gets hard. Meanwhile, we're still here, breaking our backs on land that don't forgive mistakes. You don't know anything about me." "I know enough." He turned to go, then paused. "Soak in hot water tonight. Epsom salts if Maria has any. Tomorrow will hurt worse." Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Every morning after chores, Eloise would meet Sam at the corral. Cole usually found reasons to be nearby, mending tack, working green colts, anything that kept him within sight of her humiliation. But gradually, she began to improve. She learned to move with Buttercup instead of against her, to read the horse's moods, to communicate through shifts of weight and gentle pressure. "You're getting the hang of it," Sam said one morning as she successfully completed a series of figure-8s at a trot. "Might make a rider of you yet." She was so pleased that she didn't notice the calf that had wandered into the corral until Buttercup shied violently. This time, though, she kept her seat, instinctively gripping with her knees and gathering the reins. "Well, I'll be damned," Tom Garrett said. "The lady can ride." That afternoon, she was hanging laundry when she heard a commotion from beyond the barn, a child's cry, high and frightened, followed by men shouting. She dropped the wet sheet and ran toward the sound. A small Indian girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, sat in the dust clutching a bloody arm. A broken fence rail nearby told the story. She'd been climbing where she shouldn't, probably trying to see the horses. The ranch hands stood in a loose circle, uncertain. Relations with the local tribes were tense at best, and finding an Indian child on the property could mean trouble. "Someone should fetch Josiah," Billy said nervously. "She's hurt," Eloise said, pushing through the men. She knelt beside the girl, who shrank back with wide, dark eyes. "It's all right. I won't hurt you." "Miss Whitmore, you shouldn't—" Tom began. "Shouldn't what? Help a injured child?" She gently took the girl's arm, examining the gash. It was deep but clean, needing stitches. "Someone bring my sewing basket from the kitchen, and hot water. Hurry." She spent the next hour cleaning and stitching the wound, while the girl, who she learned was called Little Sparrow, bit down on a leather strap to keep from crying out. The ranch hands watched with expressions ranging from disapproval to amazement. "There," Eloise said finally, tying off the last stitch. "You're very brave." Little Sparrow managed a tremulous smile. She said something in her language, then carefully sounded out, "Thank you." "You shouldn't have done that," Josiah said later, after the girl's father had collected her with a stone-faced nod of gratitude. Indians on the property could give people ideas. What kind of ideas? The kind that get ranches burned and people killed. His face was grim. "You don't understand the way things work out here. I understand that a child was hurt and needed help. The world ain't that simple, girl, especially not here." That evening, she sat on the porch steps, watching the sun paint the distant mountains crimson. Her body ached from the day's work. Her hands were raw despite the gloves, and her uncle's warning troubled her mind. She'd thought she was beginning to understand this place, but every time she felt she'd found her footing, the ground shifted beneath her. "That was a kind thing you did." She jumped, not having heard Cole approach. He stood a few feet away, hat in hand, the dying light softening the harsh angles of his face. "She was just a child," Eloise said. "Most folks wouldn't see it that way." He sat down on the step below her, a careful distance away. Takes a certain kind of person to look past the differences and see what needs doing, or a fool who doesn't know better. Maybe. He was quiet for a moment, rolling a cigarette with practiced movements. "My mother was Mexican. Caused all kinds of problems for her, marrying an Anglo. For me, too, growing up. It was the first personal thing he'd ever told her, and she held very still, afraid that any movement might break the spell. Is that why you—" She gestured vaguely, unsure how to ask why he'd been so hostile. "Partly." He lit the cigarette, exhaled smoke into the twilight. "Seen too many Eastern ladies come out here, play at being ranch folk, then run home when they realize we ain't noble savages in some dime novel. We're just people trying to survive on hard land that kills more often than it gives." "I'm not playing," she said quietly. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with her torn dress or disheveled hair. Maybe not. Time will tell. A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another, and another, until the night filled with their wild music. She shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. "Cold? No, it's just they sound so lonely. They're calling to their pack, letting each other know where they are." He stood, grinding out the cigarette under his boot heel. Nothing lonely about it, just survival. He walked away, leaving her alone with the dying light and the wild songs. But for the first time since arriving at Red Mesa, she didn't feel quite so isolated. She'd seen beneath his armor, just for a moment, and found not the contempt she'd expected, but something far more dangerous: understanding. That night, she dreamed of riding across the endless prairie, moving in perfect harmony with a horse that flew over the ground like wind-made flesh. In the dream, someone rode beside her, matching her pace, and when she turned to look, Cole's eyes were warm with something that might have been admiration. She woke to the pre-dawn darkness, her body aching with fresh bruises and something else, a restlessness she didn't want to name. Through her window, she could see a figure by the corral, the glow of a cigarette marking Cole's presence as he checked on the horses before the day's work began. Tomorrow, she would return to the corral. She would mount Buttercup and try again, pushing past fear and pain and the certainty of failure, not to prove anything to the watching men or to earn Cole's approval, but because this land demanded nothing less than everything, and she was beginning to understand that she had more to give than she'd ever imagined. The work would be hard. Her hands would bleed, her muscles would scream, and she would taste dust and defeat more often than success. But she would endure, not because she was a Whitmore trying to escape scandal, not because she was a lady proving her worth, but because somewhere between the sunrise and the sunset, between the first fall and the fifth, she'd stopped trying to be anything other than what this moment demanded. A woman learning to survive in a land that offered no mercy and no shortcuts, only the promise that strength came to those who refused to break. The storm rolled in from the mountains like a living thing, black clouds swallowing the stars one by one. Eloise had learned to read the weather signs over her months at Red Mesa, the way the horses grew restless, the smell of rain on the wind, the peculiar yellow-green tinge to the sky that meant trouble. But this storm was different. This one had teeth. "Going to be a bad one," Maria said, securing the kitchen shutters. "You feel it in your bones when you live here long enough." By nightfall, the wind was howling like a wounded animal, driving rain against the windows with enough force to rattle the glass. Eloise lay in her narrow bed, listening to the house groan under the assault. Thunder crashed overhead, so close she could feel it in her chest, and lightning turned her room white as noon for split seconds before plunging it back into darkness. A different sound cut through the storm, splintering wood, followed by the panicked screaming of horses. She bolted upright, heart racing. The barn. Something had happened to the barn. She threw on her wrapper and boots, not bothering with proper dress, and flew down the stairs. In the kitchen, she grabbed one of the oil lanterns kept ready for emergencies. "Where you going?" Maria appeared in her nightgown, face creased with worry. "The horses. That's men's work. You stay." But Eloise was already gone, pushing out into the savage night. The wind nearly tore the door from her hands, and rain hit her like cold needles, soaking through her thin wrapper instantly. She hunched against the gale, lantern held high, fighting for every step across the yard that had turned into a river of mud. Lightning illuminated the disaster. Part of the barn roof had torn away, and she could see horses milling in panic, some already breaking through the damaged wall to flee into the storm. Without thinking, she ran toward them, shouting to be heard over the wind. "Easy, easy now." A figure loomed out of the darkness, Cole, drenched and muddy, wrestling with a lead rope attached to one of Josiah's prize mares. "Get back to the house," he roared over the storm. "The horses! I said get back!" But she was already past him, dodging the mare's flying hooves to grab another lead rope. Together they fought to calm the terrified animals, to lead them away from the damaged section of barn before the rest of the roof came down. Other hands appeared, Tom, Billy, the Vasquez brothers, all working desperately against time and weather. "The hayloft's gonna go," Sam's voice, barely audible over the wind. "Get 'em out! Get 'em all out now!" They worked with fevered urgency, leading horses to the far corral, the tool shed, anywhere with intact shelter. Eloise's hands were numb with cold, her wrapper clinging to her body like a second skin. But she kept moving, kept working, driven by something beyond thought. A crack like a gunshot split the air. The main beam of the hayloft was giving way. "Run!" Cole grabbed her arm, hauling her backward as tons of hay and timber crashed down where she'd been standing seconds before. They stumbled together, his arm around her waist, half dragging her clear as debris rained down. They fetched up against the wall of the tool shed, gasping. In the flickering lantern light, she could see blood on his face where flying wood had cut him. "You're hurt, you damn fool, woman!" He shook her, eyes wild. "You could have been killed. The horses! To hell with the horses!" His hands gripped her shoulders, and she could feel them trembling, from cold or fear or anger. She couldn't tell. "What were you thinking?" "I was thinking they needed help." She shoved at his chest, anger rising to match his. "I'm not some delicate flower who faints at the first sign of trouble." They glared at each other, both soaked to the skin, both shaking with adrenaline. Lightning flashed again, turning the world white, and in that instant she saw something raw in his expression, not anger, but terror. Terror for her. The revelation stunned her into stillness. They stood frozen, his hands still on her shoulders, rain streaming down their faces. She became suddenly, acutely aware of how thin her wrapper was, how closely his body pressed against hers in the shelter of the wall. His eyes dropped to her lips, and she saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. "We need to check the loft," he said roughly, releasing her and stepping back. "Could be injured horses up there. Maybe someone was checking on them when it came down." The spell broke. They were ranch hand and employer's niece again. Nothing more, but her skin still burned where he touched her, and she saw his hands clench and unclench as if he, too, felt the lingering heat. They made their way into what remained of the barn, other hands joining them with lanterns. The damage was severe, but not total. The main structure still stood, though the hayloft was a ruin of splintered beams and scattered fodder. "Anyone up there when it went?" Tom called out. A quick head count showed all hands accounted for. They'd been lucky. It was past midnight, well after anyone would normally be in the loft. But something made Eloise glance at Cole, and she saw a strange expression cross his face. "I'm going up," he said. "Check for damage to the rest of the structure." "In this storm? You're mad." But he was already climbing the ladder to what remained of the loft. Eloise found herself holding her breath, watching his shadow move carefully among the wreckage. Then she heard him curse. "What is it?" Sam called. "Lantern." Cole's voice was odd. "Broken lantern up here, still warm." The implication sent a chill through Eloise that had nothing to do with her soaked clothing. Someone had been in the loft tonight, during the storm. Someone who shouldn't have been there. Cole climbed down, face grim. "We need to shore up what we can tonight. Keep the rest from coming down. Tom, get rope. Billy, find all the timber you can. Rest of you. Let's move what horses we can to the bunkhouse storage." They worked through the remaining hours of darkness, the storm gradually spending its fury. By dawn, the rain had gentled to a drizzle, and pale light revealed the full extent of the damage. Half the barn roof was gone, the hayloft destroyed, feed stores ruined. It would take weeks to rebuild. Money Josiah could ill afford. "Get cleaned up," Cole told the exhausted hands. "Mrs. Vasquez will have breakfast ready. We'll start clearing debris after." Eloise turned to go, then felt his hand on her arm. "Wait." They were alone now, the others having stumbled off to dry clothes and hot food. In the gray morning light, she could see the exhaustion etched on his face, the dried blood from his cuts. "You should have stayed in the house," he said quietly. "So should you have stayed out of that loft." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Stubborn woman. Pot, kettle?" she replied. They stood there in the drizzle, both too tired to maintain their usual walls. She reached up, surprising herself, and touched the cut on his cheek. He went very still, eyes darkening. "You need that cleaned," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Eloise." Her name on his lips was a warning, a plea, a question, all at once. "I should go," she said, but didn't move. "You should," he agreed, but his hand came up to cover hers where it rested against his face. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Then voices approached, Tom and Billy returning for tools, and they sprang apart like guilty children. But that night, alone in her room, Eloise couldn't forget the way he'd said her name, not Miss Whitmore or Lady with that edge of mockery, but Eloise, soft and urgent and full of things that couldn't be said in daylight. She rose and went to her window, looking out at the damaged barn. A figure stood there in the moonlight, and she knew without seeing his face that it was Cole, probably calculating what needed doing come morning. As if sensing her gaze, he turned toward the house, toward her window. They watched each other across the distance, two shadows separated by more than just the ranch yard. He raised his hand, in greeting, farewell, and she pressed her palm against the cold glass in response. Then he was gone, vanishing into the darkness of the bunkhouse, leaving her alone with a heart that raced like she'd been running and a knowledge that frightened her more than any storm. Something had shifted between them in those wild hours. The hostility that had defined their interactions had transformed into something far more dangerous. She'd seen him afraid, not of the storm or the falling timber, but for her. And he'd seen her as she truly was, not the Boston lady or the scandal-touched exile, but simply a woman who would run into danger because it was the right thing to do. Tomorrow, they would return to their roles. She would be Miss Whitmore, helping Maria with breakfast, tending her blistered hands, maintaining the facade of propriety. He would be Cole Travers, Josiah's top hand, organizing the men to repair the damage, keeping his distance as he always did. But tonight, in the darkness of her room with the smell of rain and hay and disaster still clinging to her hair, she allowed herself to remember the weight of his hands on her shoulders, the way her name had sounded on his lips, the heat in his eyes that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with want. Outside, a coyote called to its pack, and she thought of what Cole had said weeks ago. Nothing lonely about it, just survival. But he was wrong. Sometimes the calling was lonely. Sometimes it was the sound of one heart seeking another across an impossible distance, knowing the answer might never come, but unable to stop crying out into the darkness. She turned from the window, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, she lay in her narrow bed and thought about broken barriers, barn roofs torn away by wind, walls between people crumbled by crisis, the careful distances maintained by daylight revealed as illusion when the storm stripped everything down to its essence. The lantern in the loft troubled her, but she pushed the worry aside. Tomorrow would bring its own problems. Tonight, she had enough to wrestle with. The memory of strong hands pulling her to safety, dark eyes wild with fear for her, and the terrible, wonderful knowledge that Cole Travers was not as indifferent to her as he pretended to be. The storm had passed, but in its wake, it had left destruction and revelation in equal measure. And Eloise suspected that rebuilding the barn would be far simpler than rebuilding the walls that had kept them safely apart. The night after the storm remained etched in Eloise's memory like a brand. She'd tried to return to her routine, to pretend nothing had changed. But every time she caught sight of Cole across the yard, her pulse quickened. He seemed equally affected, his jaw tightening whenever their paths crossed, his careful distance more pronounced than ever. 3 days passed in this manner, an excruciating dance of avoidance. Then fate, or perhaps just bad timing, intervened. "Need you to ride out with Cole to check the north pasture," Josiah announced at breakfast. "Lost some cattle in the storm. Maria's down with a fever, and I need the other hands here for the barn work." Eloise's coffee cup rattled against its saucer. "Surely someone else. You've learned to ride well enough. Besides, you keep saying you want to truly help around here. This is helping." His tone brooked no argument. An hour later, she found herself mounted on Buttercup beside Cole's paint gelding, heading into the vast expanse of Red Mesa's northern range. He'd barely looked at her when she'd arrived at the corral, simply nodded and swung into his saddle with that easy grace that never failed to make her stomach flutter. They rode in silence for the first mile, the only sounds the creak of leather and the steady rhythm of hooves on packed earth. The morning was crisp, autumn beginning to edge out summer's heat, and the sky stretched endlessly blue above them. Could rain again tonight. Cole finally said, studying the horizon. Yes, she agreed, though the sky looked clear to her. Quite possibly. Silence fell again, heavier than before. This was ridiculous, she thought. They were two adults, capable of conversation. Thrown together by circumstance, there was no reason for this suffocating tension. About the other night, she began. Nothing to discuss. He cut her off, his profile hard as granite. I wanted to thank you for doing my job. No thanks needed. His coldness stung more than it should have. The man who'd held her in the storm, who'd looked at her with such raw fear and something else, something tender, that man had vanished with the dawn. They found the first dead steer an hour out, bloated and already drawing buzzards. Cole dismounted to examine it, his movements economical and practical. Lightning, he said briefly. See the burn marks? We'll need to drag it away from the water source. They worked together to secure ropes, their horses pulling the carcass to higher ground. It was ugly work, the kind that would have sent her Boston friends into fits of vapors. But Eloise had learned that death was part of ranch life, as common as sunrise. By midday, they'd found 3 more casualties and several head of scattered cattle that needed driving back to the main herd. The sun climbed higher, and Eloise shed her jacket, aware of how her damp shirt clung to her skin. She caught Cole watching her once, his gaze sliding away quickly, but not before she saw the heat in it. They stopped to rest the horses near a small spring, sharing water from his canteen and the cold biscuits Maria had packed. The cottonwoods provided shade, their leaves whispering secrets in the light breeze. You did well today, he said unexpectedly. Not many Eastern ladies could handle dead stock without flinching. I'm not most Eastern ladies. She met his gaze steadily. I thought you'd figured that out by now. He looked away. Jaw working. That's the problem. What do you mean? Nothing. We should head back. But as he stood, she caught his arm. The muscles tensed under her fingers, and she felt him tremble. Just slightly, but enough to know she affected him as much as he did her. Cole, please, talk to me. The other night, in the storm, was a mistake, he said harshly, pulling free. You're Josiah Whitmore's niece. I'm hired help. That's all there is. That's not all there is, and you know it. He rounded on her then, eyes blazing. What do you want from me? Eloise, pretty words, promises. I've got nothing to offer a woman like you. No fine house, no fancy clothes, no proper family name. Just a bedroll in the bunkhouse and a lifetime of other people's cattle. I'm not asking for any of those things. No? Then what are you asking for? He stepped closer, crowding her against the cottonwood's trunk. Because I know what I want, and it's nothing you should be offering. Nothing a lady should even be thinking about. Her breath caught at his nearness, at the raw hunger in his voice. Maybe I'm tired of being a lady. Don't! The word came out rough, pained. Don't say things you don't mean. Don't play games with me. Eloise, I'm not one of your Boston gentleman callers who'll be content with pretty smiles and hand-holding. I'm not playing. But her words were cut off as his mouth crashed down on hers, all his careful control finally snapping. This was nothing like Harold's practiced seduction. This was fire and demand and barely leashed wildness. His hands tangled in her hair, pins scattering, and she gasped against his lips. He used that gasp to deepen the kiss, backing her more firmly against the tree. She should have been frightened by his intensity, should have pushed him away. But instead, she found herself clinging to his shoulders, meeting his passion with her own. This was what she'd been craving since that night in the storm, this acknowledgement of the electricity between them, this proof that she wasn't alone in her wanting. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. Her lips felt swollen, her skin flushed with heat that had nothing to do with the sun. He stared down at her, conflict written across his features. That shouldn't have happened, he said roughly. But it did. She touched her fingers to her lips, still feeling the imprint of his. And you can't pretend anymore that there's nothing between us. Damn you, he whispered. And she wasn't sure if it was a curse or a prayer. Damn you for making me want things I can't have. He turned away, hands clenched at his sides. "We need to get back. Your uncle will be wondering." The ride home was agony. Every shift in the saddle reminded her of his touch. Every glance at his rigid back made her ache for what had been interrupted. The kisses Harold had stolen in Boston Gardens had been tepid things compared to this. Calculated performances designed to compromise her. But Cole's kiss had been honest in its hunger, devastating in its truth. As they neared the ranch, he finally spoke. "This can't happen again." "Why?" The word came out more plea than challenge. "You know why. You'll go back east eventually, back to your own kind, and I'll still be here, mucking stalls and mending fences." His voice was flat, matter of fact. "I won't be your mistake. Eloise, I won't be the story you whisper about at tea parties. Remember that savage cowboy I kissed out west?" The cruelty of his words made her flinch. "That's not fair." "Fair?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Nothing about this is fair. Not you being here, not what I feel when I look at you, not the fact that in a few months or a year, you'll leave and I'll have to watch you go." They'd reached the corral. He swung down from his horse, not offering to help her dismount, a calculated insult that hurt more than his words. "Cole, stay away from me. Eloise." He didn't look at her as he led his horse away. "For both our sakes, just stay away." She sat on Buttercup for long moments after he'd gone, tears burning her eyes. The worst part was that he was right. She would leave eventually, either back to Boston or to some other life that didn't include him. She had no choice in that. A woman of her background couldn't simply decide to spend her life with a ranch hand, no matter how much her heart raced when he looked at her. That night, she picked at her dinner while Josiah talked about the barn repairs. Her body still hummed with awareness, her lips still tender from Cole's kiss. Through the window, she could see the bunkhouse, could imagine him there with the other hands, probably playing cards and pretending nothing had changed. "You're quiet tonight," Josiah observed. "The ride tire you out?" "Yes." She lied. "I'm not used to being in the saddle so long. You'll toughen up, or you won't, and you'll go running back to Boston." He studied her with those sharp eyes. "Which will it be, I wonder?" She met his gaze steadily. "I'm tougher than I look." "Maybe so. Time will tell." He pushed back from the table. "Cole said you handled yourself well today. That's high praise, coming from him." The mention of Cole's name made her pulse skip, but she kept her expression neutral. "He's a good teacher. He's a good man." Josiah said, "Shame about his circumstances. Could have made something of himself with the right chances." "He has made something of himself," she said, more sharply than intended. Josiah's eyebrows rose. "Defending the help now? Careful, girl. People might get ideas." The warning was clear. She dropped her gaze, murmuring something about being tired, and escaped to her room. But sleep wouldn't come. She lay in the darkness, reliving every moment of that kiss, the heat of his mouth, the strength of his hands, the desperate hunger that matched her own. Outside, a horse nickered, and she wondered if it was Cole, checking the animals before turning in. She pressed her face into her pillow, trying to banish the memory of his touch, the sound of her name on his lips, the terrible truth he'd spoken. This couldn't happen again, but her heart, traitorous thing that it was, whispered back, "But it will." The die had been cast in those moments under the cottonwoods. Whatever fragile balance they'd maintained was shattered, replaced by the knowledge of what lay between them, desire and impossibility in equal measure. She'd tasted passion for the first time in her life, and like a woman dying of thirst who'd been given a single sip of water, she knew she would risk everything for more. Tomorrow, she would try to heed his warning, try to stay away. But tonight, in the darkness of her room, she allowed herself to remember and to want and to dream of a world where a lady and a cowhand could follow their hearts without counting the cost. The week following their kiss passed in careful avoidance. Cole threw himself into the barn repairs with single-minded determination, while Eloise found every excuse to work in the garden or help Maria with indoor tasks. But in a ranch's close quarters, complete separation was impossible. Their eyes would meet across the dinner table when she served the hands their evening meal, and the very air would crackle between them. It was Tom Garrett who unknowingly lit the fuse that would explode their fragile détente. Saw Miss Whitmore and Cole riding back from the north pasture the other day. He mentioned casually to Billy over breakfast, not noticing how Eloise's hand stilled on the coffee pot. Looked mighty cozy, talking under those cottonwoods. That's so? Sam looked up with interest. Well, Cole always did have a way with the ladies. Not with ladies like her. Tom laughed. Can you imagine? The Boston princess and the stable hand. The coffee pot slipped from Eloise's suddenly numb fingers, shattering on the floor in a cascade of hot liquid and ceramic shards. The conversation died as everyone turned to stare. I'm so sorry, she stammered, dropping to her knees to gather the pieces. How clumsy of me. Leave it, Maria said kindly. But Eloise was already picking up the fragments with shaking hands, needing the physical task to hide her burning face. A shadow fell over her. Cole stood there, having entered just in time to hear Tom's words. His expression was carved from stone, but she saw the muscle jumping in his jaw. You're bleeding, he said quietly. She looked down to see a shard had sliced her palm. Blood welled, shockingly red against her pale skin. Before she could protest, he'd pulled her to her feet and was wrapping his bandana around the wound with gentle efficiency. Maria, might want to get this mess cleaned up, he said, never taking his eyes off Eloise. And Tom, mind your tongue. A man could get hurt, spreading gossip like an old woman. The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Tom flushed, muttering an apology, while the other hands suddenly found their breakfast fascinating. Cole led Eloise outside, his hand firm on her elbow. Once they were away from curious ears, he examined her palm properly. It's not deep, he said, rewrapping the bandana. But you should clean it proper. Maybe stitch it if it keeps bleeding. Cole, this is why. He interrupted, his voice low and intense. This is exactly why we can't. People talk. Eloise, they watch and they judge and they destroy things they don't understand. Let them talk, she said fiercely. I don't care what they think. You should care. Your reputation. My reputation was ruined in Boston. That's why I'm here. Remember? She laughed bitterly. At least this time it would be for something real, something I actually chose. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw her own desperate wanting reflected in his eyes. You don't know what you're saying. Don't I? She stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. I've done everything expected of me my whole life. Been the proper lady, made the right connections, trusted the right man, and look where it got me. Maybe it's time I stopped caring about expectations. Eloise. Her name was a warning, a plea. I can't stop thinking about you, she confessed in a rush. About that kiss. I lie awake at night remembering how you... He silenced her with his mouth, backing her against the wall of the chicken coop. This kiss was different from the first, less desperate, more deliberate. He kissed her like a man savoring his last meal, slow and thorough and devastating. Her uninjured hand fisted in his shirt, holding him close, afraid he'd pull away again and leave her aching. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. You're going to be the death of me. Woman, I'm already dying, she whispered. Every day, pretending I don't feel this, pretending I don't want... Shh. He placed a finger over her lips. Not here, not where anyone could see. Then where? The question hung between them. Loaded with possibilities, he was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with himself. Then, there's a line shack about 3 miles north, near Willow Creek. I sometimes stay there when I'm checking the far pastures. No one else uses it this time of year. Her heart hammered against her ribs. When? I'll be riding out tomorrow afternoon to check the fence lines. He pulled back, putting proper distance between them again. What you do with that information is your choice, but think hard. Eloise, once we cross this line, there's no going back. He left her there, palm throbbing, lips swollen, whole body trembling with want and fear in equal measure. She knew what he was offering, and what it would cost them both if discovered. A lady's virtue, once lost, could never be recovered. And for him, it could mean worse than scandal. Josiah would dismiss him without reference. And in the tight-knit world of Wyoming ranching, he'd be lucky to find work mucking stalls. She spent a sleepless night warring with herself. The sensible part, the part that had been raised to be a proper Boston lady, screamed warnings. But the woman who'd emerged in Wyoming, who could rope a calf and tend a wound and ride through a storm, that woman wanted to throw caution to the winds. The next afternoon, she told Maria she was going for a ride to clear her head. The older woman looked at her knowingly but said nothing, only packed some biscuits and dried beef in a cloth. Weather might turn, Maria said quietly. Best to be prepared. Eloise met her eyes, seeing understanding there. Thank you. She rode north, following the landmarks Cole had mentioned in casual conversation over the weeks. The line shack sat in a grove of willows near the creek, barely more than a one-room shelter for cowboys caught out in bad weather. Smoke drifted from the chimney pipe. Her hands trembled as she dismounted. This was madness. She should turn around, ride back to the ranch, pretend this moment of insanity had never occurred. Instead, she tied Buttercup to a tree and approached the door. It opened before she could knock. Cole stood there, hat off, shirt sleeves rolled up, looking like every foolish dream she'd ever had. His eyes searched hers. You came, he said simply. Did you think I wouldn't? I hoped you wouldn't. He stepped aside to let her enter. For your own good, I hoped you'd be sensible. The shack was sparse but clean, a narrow bunk, a small stove, a rough table, and 2 chairs. He'd obviously been here a while. Coffee simmered on the stove, and his saddlebags lay in the corner. I'm tired of being sensible, she said, turning to face him. I've been sensible my whole life, and what has it gotten me? A scandal I didn't deserve and exile to a place where I'm neither fish nor fowl. And this will make it better? He gestured between them. This will solve your problems? No. She moved closer to him, watching his breath quicken. But it will make me feel alive. For however long we have, it will make me feel like more than the ruined Whitmore girl or the Eastern lady playing at ranch work. With you, I'm just Eloise. Eloise. He reached out, fingers ghosting along her jaw. Do you know what you do to me? How many nights I've laid in that bunk, staring at the ceiling, going half mad wanting you. Show me, she whispered. He made a sound low in his throat, somewhere between a groan and a prayer. Then his mouth was on hers, and there was no more room for doubt or second thoughts. He kissed her like a drowning man gasping for air, like she was salvation and damnation all at once. Her hands found their way under his shirt, marveling at the hard planes of muscle, the scars that told stories of a hard life. He walked her backward until her legs hit the bunk, then pulled back, chest heaving. Are you sure? The question came out raw, desperate. Because if we do this, I won't be able to let you go, not completely. No matter what happens, no matter who you marry or where you go, a part of you will always be mine. I'm already yours, she admitted, the truth of it settling into her bones. I have been since that night in the storm. What followed was a communion of souls as much as bodies. He worshipped her with calloused hands and whispered endearments, showing her pleasures she'd never imagined. The narrow bunk creaked beneath them as they moved together, finding a rhythm as old as the mountains surrounding them. She understood now why society guarded women's virtue so carefully, not because this was shameful, but because it was powerful. In Cole's arms, she felt like she could conquer the world. Afterward, they lay entwined, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. His fingers combed through her unbound hair, and she felt more at peace than she had since leaving Boston. What are you thinking? She asked. That I'm a fool, he said quietly. That this will end badly for both of us, and that I don't care, God help me, but I don't care about anything except having you here like this. She lifted her head to look at him. In the fading afternoon light, his face was softer than she'd ever seen it, the harsh lines smoothed by satisfaction and something that might have been love. "I don't regret it," she said firmly. "Not yet." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "But you will, when reality comes calling, when you remember all the reasons this can't work. You'll regret giving yourself to a man who can't even offer you a proper home. You gave me something better," she said. "You gave me the truth. No pretty lies, no false promises, just this, just us." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and she felt him stir against her again. They made love a second time as shadows lengthened outside, slower now, savoring each touch and taste and whispered endearment. As the sun began to set, they dressed reluctantly. The real world waited outside the shack's thin walls, ready to tear them apart with its rules and expectations. But inside, for these stolen hours, they'd created their own world where a lady and a cowhand could simply be two people in love. "When can we—" she began, then blushed at her own boldness. "I don't know." He cupped her face in his hands. This was dangerous enough. "If anyone suspects—" "I know." She covered his hands with hers. "But I can't go back to pretending. Not after this. We'll find a way," he promised. "Somehow, we'll find a way to be together, even if it's just stolen moments like this." They rode back separately, her leaving first while there was still light to explain her long absence. As she approached the ranch, she saw riders in the yard, visitors. By the look of their fine horses and clean clothes, her heart sank. Company was the last thing she wanted to face. But as she drew closer, her blood turned to ice. She recognized the tall figure standing on the porch with Josiah, the familiar set of those shoulders, the way he held himself with casual arrogance. Harold Pemberton had come to Wyoming. Eloise's hands tightened on Buttercup's reins as she approached the ranch, her body still humming from Cole's touch while her mind raced with dread. Harold Pemberton stood on the porch like a specter from her past, immaculate in his traveling suit despite the journey, his golden hair gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Beside him stood a man she recognized with a sinking heart, her father. "Ah, there she is," Josiah called out as she dismounted. "Eloise, you have visitors." She forced herself to walk steadily toward them, acutely aware of her disheveled appearance, her hair loosely pinned, her cheeks flushed, the scent of coal possibly still clinging to her skin. Harold's pale eyes swept over her, and his lips curved in that practiced smile she'd once found charming. "My dear Eloise," he said smoothly, descending the steps. "How rustic you've become." "Mr. Pemberton." She didn't offer her hand. "Father, I wasn't expecting you." "Clearly," her father said, his voice sharp with disapproval as he took in her appearance. "Is this how you present yourself now? Like some common ranch woman?" "I've been working," she said simply. "That's what people do here. They work. Well, that's about to change." Her father's tone brooked no argument. "I've come to take you home. The scandal has died down sufficiently, and Mr. Pemberton has graciously agreed to honor his original intentions." The world tilted beneath her feet. His original intentions? "Our engagement, darling," Harold interjected. Reaching for her hand, she jerked away, and his eyes narrowed. "Come now. Don't be difficult. I've forgiven your indiscretion. We can put this unfortunate chapter behind us." "My indiscretion?" The words came out sharp as broken glass. "You're the one who what?" Harold's voice carried a warning. "Who courted you properly? Who offered an honorable proposal, whatever misunderstandings occurred in Boston? I'm here to make things right." She saw it now, the trap he'd laid, the story he'd spun. In his version, she was the one who'd acted inappropriately, forcing him to distance himself temporarily. And who would believe otherwise? He was Harold Pemberton, scion of one of Boston's finest families. She was just a woman with a ruined reputation. "I need to tend to my horse," she said, desperate to escape, to think. "The help can do that," her father said dismissively. "We have matters to discuss." as if summoned by the word. Cole appeared from the barn. He took in the scene, the well-dressed visitors, Eloise's pale face, the possessive way Harold stood too close to her, and his expression went carefully blank. "I'll take Buttercup, Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice formal. Their eyes met for an instant, and she saw the questions there, the concern, the barely leashed tension. Her fingers brushed his as she handed over the reins, the briefest contact that sent electricity through her. "Thank you, Cole," she managed. Harold watched the exchange with sharp interest. "And who might this be?" "Cole Travers," Josiah supplied. "My top hand." "Ah." Harold's tone suggested Cole ranked somewhere between the livestock and the fence posts in importance. "Well, Travers, see that Miss Whitmore's mount is properly cared for. She'll be departing tomorrow." Cole's jaw tightened, but he merely touched his hat brim. "Sir." He led Buttercup away, and Eloise felt like her heart was being led away with her. "Tomorrow?" she said, finding her voice. "I'm not going anywhere tomorrow." "Don't be ridiculous," her father snapped. "The arrangements are made. Mr. Pemberton has secured a private rail car. The wedding will take place next month in Boston. No." The word dropped into the conversation like a stone into still water. Her father's face flushed purple. "I beg your pardon." "I said no." She lifted her chin, finding strength in the memory of Cole's arms around her. "I won't go back. I won't marry Harold. I've made a life here." Harold laughed, the sound sharp and unpleasant. "A life? Scrubbing floors and feeding chickens? My dear, you're a Whitmore. You belong in Boston society, not playing pioneer woman in this godforsaken wilderness." "At least here I'm honest work," she shot back. "In Boston, I'd be living a lie as your wife." "Enough!" Her father's voice cracked like a whip. "You've embarrassed our family quite enough. Eloise, you will pack your things tonight. You will board that train tomorrow, and you will marry Mr. Pemberton as arranged. This discussion is over." "Theodore." Josiah spoke for the first time since the confrontation began. "Perhaps we should let the girl has no say in this matter." Her father rounded on his brother. "I sent her here to learn discipline, not to become even more willful. Clearly, your influence has been lacking. Now, see here." "Gentlemen," Harold interrupted smoothly, "perhaps we could continue this discussion over dinner. I'm sure Miss Whitmore needs time to adjust to the situation. Don't you, darling?" The threat in his voice was subtle but clear. She remembered that tone from Boston, usually followed by spreading whispers that destroyed reputations and ruined lives. He'd done it to her once already. He wouldn't hesitate to do worse if she defied him. "If you'll excuse me," she said stiffly. "I need to change for dinner." She fled to her room, hands shaking as she closed the door behind her. Through her window, she could see Cole in the corral, his movements sharp and agitated as he worked with a young horse. He knew something was wrong, but he couldn't help her, not openly. Any sign of inappropriate interest from him would only make things worse. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Maria entered with a pitcher of hot water, her face creased with concern. "Heard voices," the older woman said carefully. "Your father, no?" "Yes, and the man he wants me to marry." Maria made a sound of disapproval. "The one who caused your trouble?" Eloise looked at her in surprise. Maria smiled sadly. "I have eyes. Nina, a woman doesn't end up exiled for nothing. This man, he hurt you?" "Yes," Eloise whispered. "And now he's here to claim me like I'm property he misplaced. And you don't want to go?" "I can't." The words came out broken. "Maria, I can't go back to that life. Not after finding myself here." Maria studied her for a long moment. "Not after finding him. You mean—" Heat flooded Eloise's cheeks. "I don't know what you— Shh, child? You think I don't see the way you look at each other? The way he watches you when he thinks no one notices?" Maria sat on the bed, patting the space beside her. "Love is hard enough without the world standing against it." "It doesn't matter," Eloise said miserably. "My father won't listen." Harold has money, influence. They'll drag me back to Boston whether I agree or not. Perhaps, or perhaps not. Maria's eyes glinted. You're a young man. He knows this land better than anyone. Knows places a person could disappear if they needed to. Knows people who might help. Hope flared in Eloise's chest. You mean? I mean nothing. Maria stood, smoothing her apron. I'm just an old woman talking, but if someone were to slip out during the night, say around midnight when the house is quiet, and if a horse happened to be saddled and waiting by the back gate. She shrugged. Well, young people do foolish things sometimes. She left before Eloise could respond, but the message was clear. There was a way out, if she had the courage to take it. Dinner was torture. Harold dominated the conversation, regaling them with tales of Boston society, dropping names and making cutting observations about provincial life. Her father nodded approvingly while Josiah grew increasingly stone-faced. Through the window, Eloise could see the bunkhouse, wondered if Cole was there, if he knew what was happening. You're very quiet, darling, Harold said, reaching across the table to touch her hand. She forced herself not to flinch. Not still sulking about tomorrow. I hope? I'm tired, she said truthfully. It's been a long day. Well, rest up. We have an early start. I must say, I'm looking forward to seeing you back in proper attire. This rustic phase has been interesting, but it's time to return to civilization. If you'll excuse me. She stood abruptly. I should pack. Her father waved dismissively. Yes, go. And Eloise. No dramatics tomorrow. You've caused enough scenes. In her room, she paced frantically. Midnight seemed impossibly far away. She packed a small bag with essentials, a change of clothes, the little money she'd saved, the leather gloves Cole had left for her that first week. Everything else, the silk gowns, the kid boots, the remnants of her Boston life, she left behind. At 11:30, she crept to her window. A figure moved by the back gate, barely visible in the moonlight. Her heart leaped. She eased the window open, grateful for the repairs Cole had made that eliminated the squeaks, and dropped her bag to the ground below. The climb down was treacherous in her skirts, but desperation lent her courage. She'd barely touched ground when strong arms caught her, pulled her into the shadows. Cole's familiar scent enveloped her, leather and tobacco and that something essentially him. This is madness, he whispered against her hair. If they catch us, they won't. She pulled back to look at his face. Cole, he's here to take me back. My father and Harold Pemberton, they want to. I know. Whole bunkhouse heard about it. His hands tightened on her arms. That why you're climbing out windows in the dead of night? Take me away, she said urgently. Anywhere. I don't care where. Just, please, I can't go back with them. I can't marry Harold. He was quiet for a long moment, and she saw the war in his expression. Desire battling with logic. Love fighting against reality. There's a place, he said finally. Old mining town about 2 days' ride north. Got a friend there who might help. But Eloise, if we do this, there's no going back. You'll be ruined completely. Your family, my family sold me to Harold Pemberton to save their own reputation. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. I choose you, Cole. I choose whatever life we can build together over the pretty prison they offer. He kissed her then, fierce and quick. Get your bag. There's a mare saddled in the grove past the creek. Can you find it? Yes. I'll meet you there. Need to grab supplies without raising suspicion. He cupped her face. If you change your mind, I won't. Then ride hard and don't look back. He melted into the shadows, leaving her to make her way to the grove. The mare waited as promised, a sturdy brown with a worn saddle and bulging saddlebags. She'd barely mounted when Cole appeared on his paint, moving like a ghost through the darkness. Ready? He asked. She looked back once at Red Mesa, at the life she was leaving, the first place she'd ever found herself, the first home where she'd been more than just a Whitmore daughter. Then she looked at Cole, at the man who'd seen past her name, and her scandal to the woman beneath. "Ready?" she said. They rode into the night, toward an uncertain future but away from a certain prison. Behind them, Red Mesa slept on, unaware that come morning, there would be an empty room, a furious father, and a scandal that would echo through two worlds, the proper society of Boston and the wild frontier of Wyoming. But for now, there was only the rhythm of hoofbeats, the vast star-filled sky, and the promise of freedom earned through courage and love strong enough to defy convention. Eloise Whitmore, the lady, was gone. In her place rode simply a woman who'd chosen her own path. Consequences be damned. They rode hard through the night, pushing the horses as much as they dared. Cole led them along paths Eloise never would have found alone, deer trails and dry creek beds, routes that would be harder to track. By dawn, they were miles from Red Mesa, the familiar mountains just purple shadows on the horizon. "We'll rest here," Cole said, guiding them into a copse of cottonwoods near a small stream. "Horses need water, and we need to plan." Eloise slid from the saddle, her legs trembling from the long ride. Every muscle ached, but she'd never felt more alive. The morning air was crisp, painting the world in shades of gold and green, and for the first time in her life, she was truly free. "They'll come after us," she said, watching Cole tend to the horses. "Count on it." He loosened the saddle girths, his movements efficient. "Your father won't let this stand, neither will Pemberton. Men like that don't take kindly to being defied." "Are you sorry?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. He turned to her then, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "Sorry for finally having what I've wanted since the day you fell off that horse and got back on. Sorry for choosing a life with meaning over a life of safety." He crossed to her, pulling her against him. "Never." They held each other in the growing light, two fugitives who'd chosen love over convention. But the moment couldn't last. They had to keep moving. "There's hardtack and jerky in the saddlebags," Cole said. "Not fancy, but it'll keep us going." They ate quickly, sharing water from his canteen. Eloise had never tasted anything as good as that simple meal, flavored with freedom and possibility. "Tell me about this mining town," she said. "Silver Creek. Used to be a boom town till the silver played out. Now it's mostly forgotten, which suits our purposes. Got a friend there, Jake Morrison. He runs a small ranch, does some trading. He'll help us figure next steps." And then, Cole was quiet for a moment. "I've got some money saved. Not much, but enough to maybe buy a small spread somewhere. Place where nobody knows us, where we can start fresh." As what? She needed to hear him say it. "As husband and wife, if you'll have me." He met her gaze steadily. "Won't be a fancy wedding like you might have dreamed. Probably just a circuit preacher or a justice of the peace. But it'll be real. Eloise. More real than anything Pemberton offered." "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." They reached Silver Creek as the sun peaked overhead on the second day. The town was everything Cole had described. A collection of weathered buildings clinging to the side of a played-out mountain. More ghost than settlement. But smoke rose from several chimneys, and horses stood at the hitching posts outside what appeared to be a general store. Jake Morrison proved to be a grizzled man in his 50s with shrewd eyes and a careful manner. He listened to their story without comment, then spat tobacco juice into a tin cup. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest," he said finally. "Had 2 men through here this morning, asking about a woman matching your description." Eloise's heart sank. "Already? Pemberton must have hired trackers," Cole said grimly. "Professional ones. To move that fast. Told them I hadn't seen nothing." Jake continued. "But they'll be back. Men like that don't give up easy, especially when there's money involved." "We need to disappear," Cole said. "Maybe head further north, into Montana territory." "Or," Jake interrupted, "you could face it head on." They looked at him in surprise. He leaned back in his chair, studying them. "Running only works if you got somewhere to run to. Otherwise, you're always looking over your shoulder. Now, seems to me you got 2 problems. First is the lady's family trying to drag her back. Second is making an honest woman of her so they can't. You have a solution? Cole asked. Maybe. There's a preacher comes through here every couple weeks. Man named Reverend Douglas. He asks no questions long as the couple seems willing. Due in town day after tomorrow. But if Pemberton's men are watching, that's where it gets interesting. Jake smiled. Happens I know where they're staying. Also happens the saloon keeper owes me some favors. Might be those men could find themselves too drunk to ride for a day or two. Might be they'd wake up with heads too fuzzy to remember much about why they came here. Hope flickered in Eloise's chest. You'd do that for us? For Cole. I would. Saved my life once. Down in Texas, besides. His eyes twinkled. I never did like men who hunt women like they're livestock. They spent an anxious 2 days hidden at Jake's ranch outside town. Eloise helped with chores, learning to milk the ornery goat Jake kept and gathering eggs from chickens that seemed personally offended by her presence. It was harder work than anything at Red Mesa, but Cole was beside her, and that made everything bearable. The night before the preacher was due, they sat on Jake's porch watching the stars emerge. Cole had been quiet all day, and she sensed something weighing on him. What is it? She asked finally. He took her hand, running his thumb over her knuckles. I keep thinking you could still go back. Tell them I kidnapped you, forced you to come with me. Your reputation might survive that. You could still have the life you were meant for. Cole Travers, she said firmly. If you're trying to noble your way out of marrying me, you can stop right now. I'm trying to give you one last chance to choose sense over this. He gestured at the rough cabin, the hard land, the uncertain future. I chose, she reminded him. I chose that day in the hayloft. I chose when I rode north to find you. I chose when I climbed out that window. And I'll choose again tomorrow in front of that preacher. The question is, will you? He pulled her into his arms then, holding her tight against him. Already did. Chose you the first time you got back on that horse after falling. Just took me a while to admit it. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Jake reported that Pemberton's men were indeed sleeping off remarkable hangovers at the saloon, unlikely to cause trouble before noon at the earliest. Reverend Douglas arrived on schedule, a tall, spare man with kind eyes who seemed unsurprised to be asked to perform a hasty wedding. Eloise wore her simple calico work dress, her hair pinned up with the few pins she'd saved. She had no flowers, no veil, no white silk gown, but when she walked into Jake's parlor and saw Cole waiting for her, dressed in his cleanest shirt, hair still damp from washing, eyes soft with love, she felt more beautiful than she ever had in Boston finery. The ceremony was brief. Jake and his Mexican housekeeper served as witnesses. There were no rings, they couldn't risk going to town to buy them, so Cole presented her with a band he'd woven from horsehair, promising gold when they could manage it. Do you, Eloise Margaret Whitmore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Reverend Douglas asked. I do. The words rang with certainty. And do you, Cole Michael Travers, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. His voice was rough with emotion. Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you husband and wife. Cole kissed her then, sweet and solemn, sealing their union. When they parted, Eloise saw tears in his eyes that matched her own. Well, Mrs. Travers, Jake said, breaking the moment with rough affection. I believe this calls for whiskey. They were toasting their marriage when hoofbeats thundered into the yard. Eloise's blood ran cold as she recognized the riders, not Pemberton's hired men, but Harold himself, flanked by her father and several hard-looking companions. Stay inside, Cole ordered, moving toward the door. Not a chance, she replied, following him onto the porch. Harold dismounted, his usually perfect appearance disheveled from hard riding. His pale eyes blazed when he saw her. There you are, darling. This game has gone on long enough. It's not a game, Eloise said steadily. And I'm not your darling. Eloise, her father's voice was ice. You will come with us immediately. I'll deal with this person who abducted you." "He didn't abduct me. I went willingly." She felt Cole tense beside her, but continued. "More than that, I married him. An hour ago, before witnesses." The silence that followed was deafening. Harold's face went from red to purple to white. "You're lying. Reverend Douglas can confirm it," Jake said mildly from the doorway. "Legal and binding in the eyes of God and the territory." "This is absurd," her father exploded. "I'll have it annulled. No court will uphold a marriage made under duress." "What duress?" Eloise interrupted. "The only duress I've faced is from you and Harold, trying to force me into a marriage I don't want." "You little fool," Harold snarled, his polished veneer cracking. "You think this cowboy can give you anything? You'll be living in squalor within a year, begging to come back." "Maybe," she agreed. "But it'll be honest squalor with a man who sees me as a person, not a possession." Harold lunged forward then, reaching for her. Cole moved faster, his fist connecting with Harold's jaw with a satisfying crack. Harold went down hard, blood streaming from his nose. "Touch my wife again," Cole said quietly, "and a bloody nose will be the least of your problems." Guns appeared in several hands, the tension crackling like lightning. But Jake had moved too, and Eloise noticed several of his ranch hands had materialized, all armed, all watching with steady eyes. "Seems to me," Jake drawled, "you gentlemen are trespassing. This is private property, and the lady's made her choice clear. Time you moved along." Her father looked between the armed men, his daughter, and the cowboy who'd claimed her. "You're dead to me," he said finally. "Dead to the family, dead to society. When you come crawling back, and you will, you'll find no welcome." "I understand," Eloise said, and found she meant it. "Goodbye, Father." They left then. Harold cradled between two riders, her father's back rigid with fury. Eloise watched them go, waiting for regret or second thoughts. Instead, she felt only relief and a wild, soaring joy. "You all right?" Cole asked, pulling her against him. "More than all right." She turned in his arms, looking up at her husband, with a smile that felt like sunrise. "I'm free." That night, in the small room Jake had given them, they came together as husband and wife. The narrow bed creaked, the walls were thin, and somewhere a coyote howled at the moon. It was nothing like the wedding night she might have had in Boston, in some grand hotel with champagne and silk sheets. It was infinitely better. As Cole held her afterward, she thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that first humiliating fall off Buttercup to this moment of perfect contentment. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges they couldn't yet imagine, but they would face them together, bound by something stronger than law or convention, a love that had survived storms both literal and metaphorical. "No regrets," Cole whispered in the darkness. "Never," she replied, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Outside, the Wyoming night stretched endless and full of possibilities, and Eloise Travers, formerly Whitmore, slept peacefully in her husband's arms, finally home in a way she'd never been in all her years of silk and propriety. She'd traded respectability for authenticity, security for love, and found the exchange more than fair. The lady was gone. In her place was simply a woman who'd claimed her own destiny. Consequences be damned, and that woman had never been happier. 3 months after their wedding, Cole and Eloise stood before a small homestead nestled in a valley 40 miles northwest of Silver Creek. The cabin was modest, 2 rooms with a lean-to kitchen, but the land stretched rich and promising around it, watered by a clear stream and sheltered by stands of pine. "The widow Carlson wants $300 for it," Cole said, studying the property with a rancher's eye, "including the small herd and equipment. It's most of what I saved, plus what Jake lent us." "It's perfect," Eloise breathed, seeing not what was but what could be. "We could expand the cabin, build proper corrals, maybe run some horses alongside the cattle." He smiled at her enthusiasm. These past months had transformed her from a Boston lady into a true frontier woman. Her hands were permanently calloused now, her skin kissed golden by the sun. and she could rope a calf or mend a fence with the best of them. But it was the light in her eyes that amazed him most, the joy of a woman finally living her own life. They signed the papers that afternoon, Eloise carefully writing Eloise Travers, with a flourish that made Cole grin. The widow Carlson, a tough German woman who'd run the place alone since her husband's death, shook their hands firmly. "Is good land," she said in accented English. "You work hard, it give back. You lazy, it swallow you whole." "We're not afraid of hard work," Eloise assured her. The widow studied her shrewdly. "No, I think not. You have look of woman who choose her path. Those ones, they survive anything." The first weeks were a blur of activity. They repaired fences, patched the roof, and learned the personalities of their small herd. Eloise threw herself into making the cabin a home, sewing curtains from fabric bought dear at the general store, planting a kitchen garden, even attempting to build a chicken coop that Cole had to quietly rebuild one night while she slept. But for all their happiness, shadows lingered. News traveled even to their remote valley, and they heard whispers of men asking questions in the nearby towns. Harold Pemberton, it seemed, had not given up his pursuit. Pride, more than love, drove him now. The humiliation of being rejected for a common cowboy was more than his ego could bear. One evening, as they sat on their newly built porch watching the sunset, Eloise voiced the fear they both carried. "He won't stop coming, will he?" Cole's arm tightened around her. "No, men like him can't stand losing. Maybe we should move further west, California or Oregon. Running forever's no life," he said firmly. "This is our land, bought honest. We'll stand and fight if it comes to it." The confrontation came sooner than expected. Eloise was alone, Cole having ridden to town for supplies, when she heard horses approaching. Through the window, she saw 3 riders, hired guns by their look, led by a man whose description she'd heard in town. Pinkertons, most likely, hired by Harold to track them down. Her hands trembled as she loaded Cole's rifle, but her resolve was steady. She'd learned to shoot these past months. Bottles and cans no match for her determination, but targets didn't shoot back. "Mrs. Travers," the lead man called out. "We know you're in there. Come out peaceful like Mr. Pemberton just wants to talk." "Mr. Pemberton can go to hell," she called back, surprising herself with the profanity. "This is private property. You're trespassing. Now, ma'am, no need for unpleasantness. You come with us voluntary. Nobody gets hurt. Your husband neither. When he gets back." The threat against Cole decided her. She stepped onto the porch, rifle steady in her hands. "I'm not going anywhere with you." The man smiled, cold and professional. "Lady like you won't shoot nobody." "I'm not a lady anymore," she said, and meant it. "I'm a rancher's wife defending her home. Take one more step and find out how well I've learned to shoot." They faced off in the afternoon sun, tension singing like telegraph wires. Then, salvation came in the form of hoofbeats. Not just Cole returning, but Jake Morrison and 6 of his men, all armed, all deadly serious. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Jake drawled. "Seems you're lost. Road's back that way." The Pinkerton leader assessed the odds, professional enough to recognize when he was outnumbered. "Just delivering a message is all." "Deliver it and git," Cole said, moving to stand beside Eloise. The man reached into his coat, slowly, carefully, and produced an envelope. "Mr. Pemberton wants the lady to know the offer stands. Come back willing. All's forgiven. Otherwise." He shrugged. "Well, accidents happen out here. Remote place like this, no law for miles. Be a shame if something tragic occurred." Cole took the letter, not trusting himself to speak. The Pinkertons wheeled their horses and left, dust clouds marking their retreat. "They'll be back," Jake said grimly. "With more men, likely." That night, Eloise burned Harold's letter unread, but she knew Jake was right. They'd won a skirmish, not the war. Harold's pride and her father's fury wouldn't be satisfied with threats. The attack came 2 weeks later. Eloise woke to the smell of smoke. Cole already out of bed and reaching for his gun. Through the window, they could see flames licking at the barn. "Stay inside," he ordered. But she was already grabbing her rifle. They burst out together, finding chaos. Men on horseback circled the property, torches in hand. The barn was fully ablaze, their horses screaming inside. Without thinking, Eloise ran toward the inferno. "The horses!" A rope sailed out of the darkness, catching her around the waist and yanking her off her feet. She hit the ground hard, rifle flying from her hands. As she struggled to breathe, a familiar figure loomed over her. Harold, his handsome face twisted with rage. "Did you think you could humiliate me, make me a laughingstock? You're coming back with me if I have to drag you." She clawed at his hands as he hauled her upright. Over his shoulder, she saw Cole fighting 3 men, blood running down his face. Jake and his men had arrived but were pinned down by gunfire. Her home was burning, her husband was bleeding, and Harold's hands were rough on her arms. Something primal rose in her then, not fear, but fury. This man had taken enough from her. He wouldn't take any more. Her knee came up hard, catching him where it counted most. As he doubled over, gasping, she grabbed the pistol from his holster. The weight was unfamiliar, but her rage was steady. "Enough," she shouted, firing into the air. The battle paused, all eyes turning to her. "Harold Pemberton, you pathetic excuse for a man. Look at what you've become, hiring thugs to burn out honest folks because your pride got bruised." "Eloise," he wheezed. "Mrs. Travers," she corrected, keeping the gun trained on him. "I am not your possession. I never was. I chose my life, and I'll defend it." She raised her voice. "All of you hired guns. Listen well. Whatever he's paying you isn't worth dying for, because I will put a bullet in any man who threatens my home or my husband again." Whether it was the steadiness of her hand or the wildness in her eyes, the hired men began to lower their weapons. Harold struggled upright, face purple with rage and pain. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is." Cole appeared beside her, bloodied but standing. "You're done here. Pemberton, take your men and go. Come back, and we'll bury you on our land." Harold looked between them, the cowboy and the lady who wasn't a lady anymore, and something in his face crumbled. He'd lost, truly and completely. Without another word, he limped to his horse. As the attackers rode away, Eloise turned to survey the damage. The barn was gone, taking with it their winter feed and equipment. But the horses had been saved. Jake's men had managed to free them, and the cabin stood intact. "We can rebuild," Cole said, reading her thoughts. "Yes." She leaned into him, feeling his solid warmth. "We can rebuild." The community rallied around them. Neighbors they'd barely met arrived with lumber and labor. Within a month, a new barn stood where the old had burned, raised by dozens of hands in the frontier tradition of shared survival. Even the widow Carlson came, bringing her fierce energy and a milk cow as a gift. "You stand and fight," she said approvingly. "You belong here now." Winter came early that year, blanketing their valley in pristine white. But their cabin was snug, their new barn solid, and their love stronger for having been tested. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell softly outside, Eloise told Cole news that made him whoop loud enough to spook the horses. Come summer, there would be a baby, a child born free, without the weight of expectations or scandal, a true child of the frontier. "Are you happy?" Cole asked that night, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she replied, meaning every word. Spring arrived with its usual promise of renewal. They worked side by side, expanding their herd, breaking new ground for crops, building a future with their own hands. Harold Pemberton became just a name from the past, his threats empty after that night of fire and resolution. Her father never wrote, but Eloise found she didn't care. She had a new family now, Cole, their coming child, the rough brotherhood of the frontier. One evening, as she stood in the doorway of their cabin watching Cole work with a young colt, she thought back to that first day at Red Mesa. The terrified girl who'd fallen off Buttercup seemed like a stranger now. That girl had been defined by others' expectations, shaped by scandal and shame. This woman, her hands calloused, her face sun-lined, her belly beginning to round with new life, had defined herself. She'd chosen love over safety, freedom over comfort, authenticity over respectability. The price had been high, but the rewards were beyond measure. "Coming to bed," Cole called. The colt now settled for the night. "In a moment," she replied, wanting to hold on to this feeling a little longer. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes began their evening chorus. Not lonely, she knew now, but calling to their pack. She was part of a pack too, bound not by blood but by choice and struggle and love. Cole came up behind her, arms wrapping around her expanded waist. "What are you thinking about?" "That night in the hayloft," she said, "during the storm. How it all began. You were quite the sight," he murmured against her hair. "Soaking wet, furious as a barn cat, more beautiful than anything I'd ever seen. You called me a fool. You were a fool. So was I. Fools for thinking we could fight what was between us." She turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd seen past all her masks to the woman beneath. "I love you, Cole Travers. And I love you, Mrs. Travers. Every stubborn, brave, wonderful inch of you." As they went inside together, closing the door against the cooling night, Eloise smiled. She'd been called many things in her life: lady, scandal, fool. But here in this cabin, in this valley, in this life she'd claimed with blood and tears and joy, she was simply herself, and that was exactly who she wanted to be. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the Wild West with Eloise and Cole. I hope their story of courage, love, and finding one's true self resonated with you as much as it did with me. Where are you listening to this story from? I'd love to know. Whether you're driving through Texas, sitting in a cafe in London, or perhaps even somewhere in the beautiful Wyoming landscape where our tale unfolded. Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and connections make this community special. Until next time, partners.